Okay, good evening and welcome to the latest installation of Building the Scottish State with myself, Dr. Mark McNaught, here on the 25th of November, 2021. And I have the great pleasure of having with me this evening Gordon MacIntyre-Kemp, who, among other things, is the head of business for Scotland. But what we're going to speak about in more depth, certainly this evening, is Believe in Scotland and the recent Autumn for Indie action campaign that has been initiated. So first of all, Gordon, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. Yeah. So first of all, just if you could give us just a brief biography about yourself and what your background is and how you got in. Doesn't have to be very long, but just a little bit about yourself and how you got in. And are you the founder of Business for Scotland?
Yes, I'm the founder of Business for Scotland. I started off as an economist. I started off working for a company called Procter & Gamble, big American company.
I know.
In marketing. You'll know that one.
Yep.
And then to a big food company called Northern Foods PLC, Foxy's Biscuits and Good Guys Pizzas, or Chicago Pizzas it was, and all those sort of things, and lots of cakes. Most of the sandwiches and Marks and Spencer's, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And from there to Scottish Enterprise, which is the Scottish Government's economic development arm, and I was there for about 4.5 years in national economic planning.
Okay. And what year was that? What year was that roughly? You were
that was the late 90s.
Okay.
Yeah, I should have lied and made myself seem a bit younger. But yeah, that was the late 90s, last century. And I've run a few companies, been a director of a few firms. And was basically in, I think it was 2011, the SNP got the majority, and that meant there was going to be a referendum. So I said to myself, right, well, I'm going to start an organization called Business People for Independence, because I happen to know a handful of business people that supported independence. So I phoned up Jim Mavor and said, I would like to do this. And he said, actually, there's an organization that existed to campaign for devolution called Business for Scotland. And we've been talking about who would like to pick it up again for the referendum, and we think it should be you. So I picked up this old organization and ran it completely independently of the SNP or the Greens. The Greens weren't necessarily part of the Yes campaign to begin with. And ran that during 2014. We were the biggest spender of all the registered Yes groups, and had a big fight in our hands over the sort of economy and the scaremongering, etc. We had some about 14 spokespeople who were on TV a lot, etc. And it was quite a learning curve.
Sure.
I just wish I'd known then what I know now about independence campaigning.
Well, that's exactly what I'd like to ask you is, what did you learn from that experience? I mean, from my more broad perspective, I could, there was the question of the currency, and that was widely credited with maybe, because there wasn't a really good answer on that. Back prior to 2014, I was speaking to my uncle, who was quite aged he's quite aged, and I was asking about independence. I was like, Alex Salmon, how much is it going to cost me? I want numbers. Numbers. So what did you learn from that experience that you'll do differently in the next one?
Oh, well, loads basically. But the first thing that came to mind was that the Scotland's Future paper, when it came out, just didn't have enough in it about the economy. And it was when I read that, I just went, this is now going to be really tough. It wasn't forward thinking enough. It didn't really put a really solid vision for what we would do with the powers of independence and the sort of country we wanted to run, and how our economy would run and thrive as a result of these powers. There wasn't enough in there as far as I was concerned. And I think that's something that we have to change. I think also, we need to I think coming up to the next GERS, I'm not one of these people who says that GERS is rubbish data and all that sort of stuff, because I've been through every line of GERS at least twice with the people who collate it, and I've had some success in talking to them about what should and shouldn't be included and all these sort of things. So, and even just earlier on this year, I had a 1 hour Zoom meeting with them on various methodologies, etc. So I think the data is as good as anyone has for what is essentially a region of a country, because that's how GERS treats us as a region of a country, and therefore we're a country within a union, but GERS doesn't think that, and therefore it takes money that is spent outside Scotland and just arbitrarily applies it to Scotland, and 100% of Scotland's debt or deficits are caused by the fact that we have actually been subsidising the UK for generations. And I think that although GERS is useful in that respect, in terms of the core data that is in GERS, is the core data we will use to forecast an independent Scotland's economy, given the different policies we put in place. So it's still a worthwhile data. The thing is, we do actually have to do that job this time and present a full economic case for independence and say, this is what we're going to do differently. This is how you will thrive as a direct result of independence and the policies we'll put out there.
Yeah, and let's see, and how what is the Scottish debt? And because as far as I understand, the Scottish government can't borrow money, and so what is the debt? Is it just a question of the difference between the amount of money that's spent in Scotland and the tax revenue that goes into the treasury? Or I mean, how is debt calculated, and who owes what to who, basically?
Well, what you've just described is the deficit, and it's a very notional deficit, because it's spend which is arbitrarily applied to Scotland, such as defence spending that happens outside of Scotland.
Right, yeah.
Such as things we wouldn't necessarily spend money on, nuclear weapons, etc. The cost of Brexit is one of the biggest costs right now. The way that COVID was mishandled has been incredibly expensive. That has been added, population percentage share, etc., to our accounts. But the main thing is actually that in the years, the 34, 35 years, I can't remember off the top of my head it was, that even GERS, with all these ghost costs, making it look as if Scotland's economy wasn't performing as well as it was. Most of the time that GERS has been produced, Scotland has actually in GERS shown a surplus, but that surplus wasn't spent in Scotland. And if it had been reinvested in Scotland's economy, I reckon our economy would be 25% bigger than it is. Our population would be about 10 to 15% bigger than it is. We'd be very wealthy. If we'd been an independent nation with the revenues, because I think we've generated about 2% more oil than Norway has, and yet Norway is you can't even calculate how much better off they are than us, because they've invested in their own country, and we invested in, well, largely London and the southeast. Basically that's why our accounts now show a deficit, because we didn't get the surpluses to actually invest, to upgrade our infrastructure, to invest in our economy. But there are multiple ways in which there are things such as DVLC in Swansea, maybe 500, the cost of 500 staff are applied to Scotland because they're doing all of our vehicle licensing. And that is fair, except for the fact that when they spend their wages, they spend them in Swansea. They don't spend them here. They don't spend them in the local shops. They don't buy new kitchens. They don't hire joiners. And so that doesn't boost Scotland's economy. And you can take a guess at maybe, that might help a little bit in this respect or that respect, but that's when the numbers would be crap if you tried to do that. So basically, we have to create a set of accounts for an independent Scotland. We have to say that these are the policies we're going to follow. This is what we think will happen to the economy as a direct result, and then show people GERS as the UK figures, as if we stay part of the UK, and then these figures here, which are what we expect, what we're projecting as an independent Scotland. And then that puts GERS in the right context and shows that it is accurate. It's actually just shows it's worse than it will be in an independent Scotland.
Okay, and how precise in terms of a campaign? And I totally agree that these need to be much more specified as to what the economy will actually be. But how much planning and you could certainly make a plan and do the accounts and all that. But how can you guarantee that this will actually be enacted when independence is achieved? It's that kind of what I perceived also in addition to what you said in the last referendum, because I had worked on a constitution that I'd proposed and I sent to the Scottish government, and my view was that they should put that out there, or another some kind of interim constitution at least, and say this is what the state's going to be like, so people know what they're voting for. And so that how. From an economic point of view, I mean, for example, would you be in favor of Scotland creating its own new currency, for example? And can you put that forward in a campaign saying we are going to create a new currency, and this is why it will be enacted when when independence is achieved, and not just a promise that kind of vaporizes. So how do you see making these proposals binding, that people can know that will be the case when independence is achieved?
Well, what I'm actually asking for is for the Scottish Government to do this work, not for yes groups to do the work, etc. It has to have the same kudos, the same authority as GERS, and has to be a Scottish Government projection with the policies that we, if we are re-elected, will put in place. And that answers that question, I think, because I think everybody just accepts that the SNP, having delivered independence, will be the first, well, for several years anyway, because there won't be another election for a few years, will be the first government of an independent Scotland, and they will therefore implement those. And the thing about that is, if you don't like the way they're implementing them, then there'll be an election along a couple of years later and we can get rid of them. So basically, to actually have the vision to say, this is what it's going to be like, this is how we will thrive, whereas actually if we stay with the UK, we're going to have trouble even surviving as an economy. And because, there is real trouble coming with Brexit, the real damage of Brexit hasn't hit yet, but there's just so much incompetence and so much corruption. And I think for the first time in 2014, voters thought the UK was okay. They thought David Cameron was okay. They thought that it wasn't too damaging to stay. So therefore, the perception of risk was always becoming independent. Now the perception of risk is, I would say, more in the eyes of most voters staying with the UK. But in order to get them to jump to yes, we have to actually start a campaign, and then we have to present them with the alternative vision, and then they can balance the alternative vision to the risk of staying with the UK. And if they do that, I think people will move to yes. That's what we're seeing in the polling that we're doing, that when we actually present these ideas to people, they move to yes quite considerably.
Okay, and do you get the impression that this economic planning is going on in the Scottish government? Because we're not aware of it. I mean, what do you know about the degree of planning which is occurring at this point?
There are several things. Which are public that I know that I can talk about. You talked about the Constitution, for instance. There was a group set up under Mike Russell, the head of the Independence Unit within the SNP, invited lots of different people to come along, and different independence groups. The Commonweal were there, Business for Scotland and Believe in Scotland were there, and a draft constitutional statement to be given to the people to look at and discuss is being drafted. So I know that is in the public eye. In terms of what I'm saying here, in terms of what I think needs to be done, this is what I am asking the Scottish Government to do, and we are in active conversations with them, shall we say, about what needs to be done. And there's a great deal of common ground, shall we say, between Business for Scotland and the Scottish Government, or many people in the Scottish Government who will be responsible for this work. They haven't come back and said, yes, we will do exactly that, but there is very, very positive conversations have happened.
Okay, good. All right, so I'd like to turn now to Believe in Scotland, another group that you have formed, and so why was Believe in Scotland formed, and what are you doing, and just tell us about the functioning of of Believe in Scotland.
Well, Believe in Scotland Business for Scotland is a organisation, is a limited company, and it is an organisation which lobbies for business, which campaigns for independence, which produces materials, and has an online magazine, which is very well read. And being the sort of lead business group, we carry out a lot of the functions of a normal business organisation, such as the Chamber of Commerce, IOD, that sort of thing. We do some training, we do lobbying, we organise annual dinners and monthly lunches and networking events, these sort of things. But I decided, I think it was 2018 or 2019, mid 2019, to get out on the road and actually go around lots of yes groups and some political party branches and give some talks. And the one thing I was hearing from every single one of them was that no one's producing materials, nobody's coordinating, no one's helping us. If we want to put a leaflet out, we have to decide what it is ourselves, but we don't have the resources to design it properly, etc. Some were doing some things and some were doing other things. And they said, look, we need someone to actually fulfill the role of Yes Scotland, only not in the way Yes Scotland did it, but actually help us. So I said, it was at a meeting. It was a Aberdeen Independence event, and it was about my 10th time that people have been saying this to me. And I said, well, look, we've got a team, we've got salaried staff. How about we provide this service to the Yes movement? And they all just burst out clapping and sort of like, and I thought, okay, might be onto something here. So I went away, thought about it, came up with the slogan, Believe in Scotland. With that, started producing materials. And the first piece of material we produced was I think I've got one here, the Scotland A Brief book. This is the mini version. We've got the maxi as well. And we've sold 42,000 now of these books, which has been very successful. Now, if you look at, we're not in the middle of a campaign. 42,000 is a huge number, because there's not that many active Yes groups and activists, etc. But we decided to finance this differently. We didn't do a crowdfunder and say, look, we'll write a book if you give us money and we'll distribute it for free. We talked to the Yes groups, and the Yes groups said, well, actually, why don't we buy a book from you in the volumes, etc., that we can distribute, but put a price on it. So these retail at £3.50, but we sell them to Yes groups at anything from, if they order enough, 75 pence a copy, which practically makes no profit for us whatsoever. But they can then sell them out of their shops, and we know that £30,000 to £40,000 has been raised by local Yes groups to campaign locally from the fact that we provided them with this material. So it's not about us profiting; it's about funding the Yes movement, and that was the first thing we did. And then we started to say, well, they wanted leaflets to deliver. Our first one was the Scotland's Wealth leaflet, which basically points out that with 8.4% of the population, most people can rattle most of these off now in a conversation in a pub, and that's really good. I've even seen MPs do it on television. It's quite interesting in interviews. We did some billboards last year, and one of the big billboards we did was this one here. The UK pays the worst state pension in the developed world. Let's raise it to £200 a week. 200 a week was the second time we did it. The first time we said let's double it. But what it says when you click on the link is that actually we're going to start off with a lower number. And then as our economy grows with the powers of independence, we can afford to raise pension to a higher number. But we've calculated that at that time, £200 a week was the minimum pension that you should give to somebody who has no other private earnings in order for them to live with dignity. I think it's gone up because of inflation, etc. And somebody else has replicated our work and actually figured out it's £209 a week now. But they included Netflix and Amazon Prime subscriptions, and we didn't, and that's kind of the difference.
The cost of living, right?
Well, I asked one of our, we have a membership model at Believe in Scotland, and every month I do a surgery with all the members, and we usually get between 75 and 100 people logging on to have an hour's chat, or maybe actually about 2 hours chat. I do go on a bit. And I asked them, I said, well, should we have included Netflix? And it was like universal, yes, you should. We need Netflix. The pensioners were like, yeah, we need Netflix. And so we've been campaigning along those lines. We've been doing leaflets. We organised, we've had 3 different batches of national billboard campaigns right across Scotland, and our billboards are very effective. Independence is normal, pensions, independence is inevitable, pointing out that so many young people want independence, etc., hammering home key messages that are laying the foundation blocks for when we actually really get into the campaign. We then did a crowdfunder where Business for Scotland donors gave us £60,000, which was to take care of office costs and salaries and admin and these sort of things. And then we raised another £60,000 to match that from small micro donations. And that £60,000 has been spent on campaigning materials only. So every single penny that was raised goes on campaigning materials. And we did the Day of Action on the 7th anniversary of the independence vote. And 112 local Yes groups signed up. That was a partnership between ourselves, the National, and the National Yes Network, and it worked very well. We managed to distribute to Yes groups 600,000 items of campaigning materials, books, leaflets, a newspaper we did called Open Minds, which was also in the National, and that was the first part of the autumn of Indie Action that you mentioned.
Yes.
And that went down very well. More than half of the independence movement was not functioning. It was not meeting. It was redundant, and that basically lit a fire under them. And actually, it didn't light a fire under them. What it did is it was a shot in the arm, and they went, yeah, giving us something to do. Didn't cost anything because we didn't have any funds. Get out there, get on the streets, and start having conversations. And a lot of them realised, because it said "Believe in Scotland" and not "Yes" or not SNP or Alba or Green Party or whatever else you would put on there, because it said that on most of the stands, there were people who were coming up and sort of having more open conversations. So the name really worked. At the moment, we did a partnership with the National and the SNP. And right now, the SNP are delivering 1 million copies of this newspaper across Scotland. It's an 8-page newspaper with content from ourselves, from the SNP, and we also got the Greens involved in that as well, the Scottish Greens. And basically, it talks about well-being and how we can invest in Scotland's well-being with the powers of independence, and what a well-being economic approach is, and how that relates to building back better, how that relates to building resilience into our economy and making choices that Westminster is just never going to make. And so it's I think fundamentally important message that comes out with the SNP's logo on it, because it's completely incompatible with the Sustainable Growth Commission, as indeed is the SNP's Fairness and Social Justice Commission is completely incompatible with the Sustainable Growth Commission report. So although I think there'll be some stuff, like some good research around Scandinavian countries, etc., that was used for the Sustainable Growth Commission, that's still very valid, etc. But I think a lot of the approaches have changed now, even within the SNP, and this is the two parties of government reaching out to the population of Scotland and saying, this is the tack that we're taking now, and we're going to be we're willing to work, sending a message to the Yes movement that we're willing to work with the Yes movement. It's a one-off. We're not going to do this again. It was just people coming together for a statement that was needed in this particular time. Okay. Because the paper targets the undecided, the soft yesers, and the soft no's. We're not after the yesers. It doesn't matter whether they read it or not. It doesn't matter whether the hard no's read it. It's the people that got us to 58% earlier this year and late last year, and then have got worried about COVID, and they're now going, oh, I don't know. We're sending a message to them saying it's the answer to your worries. And so it's only then we want to read it. And, I think the content's effective in that respect.
Okay. I wanted to get on to the, and I presumably you've done a lot of public opinion research in developing these proposals, and so I just wanted to talk about that. What were the, what polls did you commission? What were the types of questions? What were the findings from these surveys that you had conducted?
Well, we've published a lot of them. If you go to the Business for Scotland site, there's an author called Polling Team. It's not always myself, or it could be various people, Richard, etc., and some of the researchers have put information up there. So you can find a lot of the data that we published there. We obviously we asked the yes/no question, and we've probably published the yes/no data more often than any other data. But a lot of what we collect is private data, which we use in discussions with the SNP, in discussions with the people working with to create policy suggestions, those sort of things. But the main piece of information that we can find is that there is a difference between Scotland and England and how we think, what our values are, how dedicated we are to those values. There are differences in opinions in terms of how many. And you might say it's because there's more conservatives in England, and I think that's possibly the case. So you would expect there to be slight differences. But if you really want to see the differences, you just need to see who England elects and who we elect, right? Never mind the parties, never mind Boris and Nicola and the personalities, etc. We elect people to the left of centre. They're electing people who are very significantly to the right of centre. And so basically we looked around the world at well-being, which we've been campaigning for it was in our mission statement. It was all about well-being right from 2011 onwards. And so we looked around the world at governments that were talking about well-being, and we took a sort of policies that we could say, well, this is a well-being policy, and we put them all down on a bit of paper, and we thought these hang really well together. You could use this as the foundation blocks for building a well-being socio-economic approach. And so basically our mantra is that socialism and socialism and capitalism are dead. They're last century's ideas. The challenges of this century, specifically the ecological challenges we've got with climate change, etc., cannot be addressed by the old ideas. We need new ideas. And a well-being approach where we can still grow our businesses, still grow our economy, still create wealth, but do it much more fairly than we currently do, and also factor in that we protect the planet and we protect society as we grow. So growth might be a lot slower. Consumerism might have to drop considerably, but we think there is a way to approach this that has, you might say, some socialist principles in dealing with society, some capitalist principles in dealing with business. But the truth of the matter is that you can't have a strong economy without a strong society. You can't have a strong society without a strong economy. And all that socialism and capitalism have done, all that left and right, is we've just swung one way to the other and failed to invest in one half of the formula. And that's why we keep on booming and busting. And so basically that's what our polling told us, that the people of Scotland are ready to vote for this. And if you say, we want a well-being approach to economics in an independent Scotland that will be radically different from the rest of the UK, because it will look at fairness, health outcomes, environmental outcomes, and make all of these things as important in our thinking as economic growth is. How would you vote in a referendum if that was the approach we took and it jumps 10%?
Sure.
So a well-being approach takes us to 60-odd%.
Okay, but I'm just wondering, again, kind of going back to the point I made before about the economic policies, how, do make sure that when people vote for this, and okay, yeah, I want to vote because of this well-being policy, that it is actually enacted. I mean, could there be provisions put in a draft constitution, or could it be, if you're, how close can you go to saying, okay, if you vote for this, you will have this, not that it's just a promise that, like so many other political promises, does not.
Essentially, we are a lobbying organization. We lobby the SNP to make changes. And so we are saying to the SNP, here's our data, here's what we're finding, come and talk to us about this. And what we're suggesting is that they put out the alternative GERS, that they put out a new Scotland's future type document, but base it on well-being, and that is the manifesto upon which people are voting for independence. This is what they understand they are voting for, and it comes from the Scottish government, and therefore people will believe it. Now we can say it, and people will say, yeah, you're the biggest yes organisation. That has a little bit of credibility. Well, it has credibility amongst the yes community, but it really doesn't have any credibility amongst the unionist community, if there is such a thing. So we need to get the Scottish government to make these commitments, and that is what we are trying to do, and that's what we'll spend the next few months working very closely, we hope, with the Scottish government to make sure that it has a clear path to using a wellbeing approach, or at least as much of it as we can get them to agree to in an independent Scotland, and that gives you the surety that that is what's going to happen.
I'm just wondering if that could be in the forms of draft bills or something like that would be promised to be enacted upon independent. I'm just wondering, again, I totally agree with you, and I think they're fantastic policies, but actually how they come about, the more you can work with the SNP government and get it to be, binding on it, that obviously the better. Just to our audience, we see this, we see the questions coming in. We'll get to those at the end, but I did want to move on to a couple of other points. Basically, the securing a referendum. And there's I know as well as I do that there is an impatience regarding the calling another referendum. Nicola Sturgeon has said it would be in 2023, but she has also said that she wants it to be under the gold standard Section 30 order. Boris Johnson, I don't know if he'll be there much longer, but he has said he would not allow for it. And I would think that would be the case with any conservative successor. And I've heard it argued that, well, the more support for independence, that will, it's democratically unsustainable for the UAK government to deny it. But I don't see that I see them completely impermeable to democratic will. So that's just my view. How do you see it in achieving a referendum that will be legally binding and accepted? So how do you see it?
So first of all, I mean, I have a slight affliction that you obviously don't suffer from, and that is that I find it absolutely impossible to believe anything Boris Johnson says. He changes his mind with the wind, and I agree with you. He has absolutely no intention whatsoever of agreeing to a Section 30. However, that doesn't mean he won't. That doesn't mean that when we get to the point where there is a majority government in Scotland, the Greens and the SNP together, and anyone else that wants to vote for it, votes through the referendum bill and says, we're going to hold a referendum and this is the date, and then the letter goes down saying the new majority government is demanding a Section 30, I would say it's 50-50 whether it will be accepted or not. The reasons for accepting it is they might think they've got a chance to win if they can negotiate a little bit around, what the question is or what the spending limits are or who can vote, all that sort of stuff. But I think largely if I was the SNP, I would just say it's exactly the same as the last referendum. We might stop people with holiday homes voting, but other than that, I'd be happy with that. Voting franchise. The question, yes, no. Everyone's divided into those camps. We can't change the question. It'd be ludicrous to suggest we could. If they say, look, no, under no circumstances are you doing this, etc., then the Scottish Government will go ahead and hold a referendum without a Section 30. It's not illegal to do so. If the UK government wants to prove it is illegal, they have to go to court. Let's hope they are stupid enough to go to court and try and stop a referendum and stop a government elected to Holyrood with a majority mandate from holding a referendum. It would probably add 7, 8, 9, 10% to the yes vote. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we want them to either say yes, and then we'll beat them, or we want them to say no and boost support for independence. Because if they boost support for independence, if they put themselves on the wrong side of the democratic issue, then the other routes to independence come into play. Mm-hmm. Now, you cannot UDI, you cannot simply form and say the majority of MPs in Westminster are SNP, so the majority just simply need to say we withdraw and therefore it's legal. That is true, actually. They could. They have the power to do so. I believe they have the power to do so. That would also be challenged in a court of law. But there's a slight problem here. The Scottish people don't want them to do that. The support for independence is currently about 50%. I think its real figure should be about 55%. I think there's a lot of people who are just saying, like, not now because of COVID and Brexit and all these sort of things. And, we have to triangulate their problems and show how independence solves those. And we're not going to do that for a wee while yet. So, but it will come back to where it was at the end of last year. But support for independence sitting at 50% right now is support for independence achieved through a referendum, and that is what the mandate is for. Mm-hmm. If you want a mandate to declare unilateral independence, then you have to go to another election and ask for that mandate. Mm-hmm. But you can't get that mandate. It would drop to about 33% support for independence if we tried to ask that mandate now. And you cannot be accepted by the international community as an independent country if 70% of your population don't want it to happen. You have to carry the people with you. And so exhausting the democratic route, I don't know if we'll have a referendum, a Section 30 referendum or not. What I know is that if we don't exhaust the democratic route, then it doesn't put the other options on the table. So plan B, I would suggest, is that at the next general election, if we are somehow stopped through the Supreme Courts, etc., and the democratic route is somehow shut down, then at the next general election, we can then ask, quite reasonably, for a mandate to a majority plus one of MPs walks away. Mm-hmm. And then you might get it. You ask it now, you're not going to get it. It's a clever way to actually knock 20% off the independence campaign. And Me personally, I'm a little bit invested in all the campaigning. I don't want to lose 20% overnight. And that's why I don't suggest that's the route. But all of these routes are plausible. We just have to exhaust the democratic route first, the gold standard route first, and then the people of Scotland, the soft yeses and the undecideds, will let us use the others, but they won't let us use them right now. They'd go mad.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And regarding the franchise, there's been, a lot of discussion about that. I saw an earlier comment that's saying it should only be Indigenous Scots, and you mentioned something about the franchise.
Well, to hell with that, right? I'm not taking that from anybody. That is a ridiculous statement. Does that mean Mike Russell can't vote? Does that mean Lorna Slater can't vote?
I don't believe that.
What is Indigenous? I've got a Spanish great grandmother and a Russian great grandmother. I've got a Cossack blood in me. What's Indigenous?
I think what they meant, or maybe it was, would be that only basically long-term residents, people that have truly.
Well, that's not Indigenous Scots, but even so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got a problem here, Mark. I really do. I've started to hear one or two people say that sort of thing recently. And as far as I'm concerned, if you say that only true blood Scots can vote, then you turn us into the sort of nationalist movement that everybody despises. It's an absolute vote loser amongst true-blooded Scots, if there is such a thing. And it's just it's not acceptable, and it's not who we are. Our nationalism, our national movement isn't a nationalist movement. It's not about being better than other people. It's about the people here sharing values and deciding that we, as the people who live in this area, are going to run our affairs differently. We're going to do things better. And the other thing is that when I told you about the well-being approach and how it makes people jump to yes, well, if you offer a £200 pension, a £200 a week pension is the basic state pension, which is still one of the lowest in Europe. Might be still the lowest in Europe. But if you offer a £200 pension and you promise a well-being approach and detail what the well-being approach is, then you get English-born voters to about 50-50, and European-born voters or EU-born voters and voters from elsewhere go to about 67% yes. The problem isn't people who aren't born in Scotland. The problem is people like Gordon Brown who are born in Scotland. It's people that don't believe in Scotland. It's people who kind of hate Scotland and hate the idea of Scotland that we've got to convince. The people who were you born here? Are you an Indigenous Scot?
Yeah, and to be fair,
that's ridiculous.
I mean, different people have expressed different views on this. But what one of the concerns that people in my group have raised is that and certainly, I mean, people like Matt Campbell, who's a head of English.
Oh, for sure, great guy.
Of course, he would be able to vote. It's not a question of ethnicity. It's just more a question of being having chosen Scotland to live there over the long term. Using and this is where the franchise is a little complicated, because you've had apparently since COVID, you've had a lot of English people move to Scotland who may not and whereas in, for example, where I live in France, I'm I was a member of I was a UK citizen until that's been taken away from me. Well, at least my right to be here, but as a UK citizen, I was able to vote in local elections and European elections, but not because there was the perception that the French people, the French citizens, should be the ones that vote on more constitutional matters, including the president, referendums, and I know it's but whereas in Scotland you'd be using the local franchise, which could include people with holiday homes or members of the British Army. It's just a question of, because I'll finish quickly. From what I understand, in the last election, people who consider themselves Scottish voted for a majority to become independent, but it was the other including holiday homeowners and others that swung the difference. Right. So it's just concern over that it's not just people who have holiday homes and British soldiers that are stationed here, that kind of thing. So
first of all, we didn't actually track the ethnicity of people who voted yes. There were some polls afterwards where it was suggested that independence was more popular amongst what you would class as Scottish-born, etc. But this isn't a nation just of Scottish-born. It's a rainbow coalition nation of people from all over the world, and so many cultures, diverse cultures that add real value. And right now, I think in the last poll, I looked into the birth, because it's split down by born in Scotland, born in England, born in EU, born elsewhere in some of these polls. The last one I looked at, EU and born elsewhere were more pro-yes than Scottish people were. And so, yes, you will find lots of English people, or lots more English people are anti-independence than pro. That is for sure. But if you offer them make the right arguments, then you can get them to about 50-50. You know, the argument isn't who was born where. The problem we had was that we didn't have a strong enough economic plan, and we didn't have a plan for dealing with all the scaremongering, particularly that was very effective in pensioners, and pensioners vote more often, and young people who supported independence didn't get out there and vote. So, you know, we had so many problems that are so much bigger than a few holiday homeowners. I mean, it's not as if there's a million holiday homeowners that can sway every election. There isn't. And in some places, in certain parts of Argyll and Bute and, you know, Challies up in Aviemore, etc., yes, it's slightly more, but at the end of the day, it's not that big an issue. But I would support talking to the Electoral Commission and saying, let's be very careful about holiday homeowners and people that are actually invested in Scotland voting. But the thing is, if you say, hey, there's 500,000 English or 420,000 English people, I can't remember what the number is, live in Scotland, they shouldn't vote, then you would lose hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Scottish people who would say, oh my God, the SNP and the independence movement are nationalists of the old-fashioned, unreconstructed type, I'm not going to vote for them. It is a massive vote loser. Even if you just want to look at it tactically, it's a terrible, terrible idea, and it would give them a weapon. It would hand a campaigning weapon that would be a club to beat us with. So no, I'll tell you what, if it's only Scottish-born people that are allowed to vote, then I won't campaign.
Well, I haven't heard it expressed from that. It's just it was more concerns about. Excuse me. It's more concerned about there's been quite a migration of English people moving to Scotland over the past few years, and I certainly take all your points.
I don't know of all the English people that I know and Welsh people. And with one exception, the Irish people, I'm including Northern Ireland and Ireland in there, which I probably shouldn't do, all of them are supporters of independence. And I think that people moving from England to Scotland now, if you ask them, is it likely that Scotland's going to become an independent country in the next few years, they'll say yes. If they were rabid and totally unopen to persuasion with the right policies and ideas, then they wouldn't be moving here. Because they'd be moving to and worried about a foreign country, etc. So some of my biggest donors are English business people who've moved their businesses to Scotland because they think we're going to become independent, and they became our biggest donors.
I would imagine that. Which brings me nicely onto my my kind of final questions before we get to the questions that have been raised on the chat. But how do you see business regulation and the way business operates in an independent Scotland? I mean, my own view, I'm much more familiar with the United States, but I live in France. So, but the way I see it, the business regulation is basically evaporated over, certainly since the Reagan years of deregulation, and especially in the financial sector which has permitted a very high level of predatory capitalism, charging ridiculous interest rates on consumers, and certainly policies that would go well against this notion of a well-being of Scotland, and where you have
absolutely
so many millions of Americans completely out of their depth in debt, working really, miserable jobs. And, it's really a shame. I've seen it's deteriorated so much. I'm less familiar with the UK, but I get the impression some of the same trends are at play. And I live in France, and competition is well regulated. The union, you're able to join a union. You're encouraged to do so. Workers' rights are quite strong. You can't get fired easily. It's a very different environment. It's sort of a hybrid between capitalism and socialism.
Yeah.
So, which all countries are to a certain degree. How do you see businesses, as someone who is deeply involved and knows a lot about it, and has seen both the excesses of capitalism and of socialism and experienced, how do you see business being regulated in an independent Scotland to help make this well-being agenda become reality?
Well, a lot of those sort of things you talked about, lending money, the sort of, it's gone bust long ago, but, yes, car finance, you can't get a loan, you can't afford a car, don't worry, we'll give you the money, but it's at 5,000% APR.
Yeah.
In a well-being socio-economic approach, that is illegal. You're not going to trap people into, debt to that level. I think in terms of regulations, people say, what if the banks fail in an independent Scotland? Well, if you regulate them properly, they won't.
Exactly.
It was because Gordon Brown didn't regulate the banks at all. In fact, he took away all the regulations, and other people in his position around the world did the same, that they actually were able to become casino banks and crash. So regulation is important, environmental regulation is important, but I think it's not just regulation. I think it's about using taxation to change behaviours. So, for instance, we've put a policy suggestion to the Scottish Government, which we call benefit corporation tax credits. Now, the idea is that, well, first of all, you stop all offshoring, you stop the use of tax havens, etc. And if countries are saying, well, we'll leave because we refuse to pay the tax that is due, we want to be able to cheat and rip tax out of your economy, then you're not, they're not doing you any good. So it doesn't matter if they leave. If their operations, if they move their headquarters or whatever, who's headquartered in Scotland nowadays anyway, they're all in London. But, so those companies are not a benefit to Scotland. So if you, for instance, said, well, England is lowering corporation tax significantly, what we're going to do is we're going to keep it at 20%. We're going to put it back up to 20%. We're going to keep it at 20%. But if you meet all of our well-being criteria, if you invest in research and development close to market R&D, if you have gender balance on your board, if you pay the real living wage, if you have young people's apprenticeships, if you have equality in your hiring policies, if you give back to your community, if you do all of these things, if you increase your exports, so lots of hard targets in there as well, then every time you do one of these things, you get a tax credit. And if you're a company that really is a benefit to our society, that's hiring and training people and creating added value jobs and increasing exports and bringing currency into the country, and research and development, which is making you more profitable, and you're reinvesting in Scotland, and you're paying your taxes, and you're paying the real living wage, and if you're doing all of those things, then your corporation tax will be lower than England's. And it would be if you moved to England. Okay. Now, that might mean Amazon might go, oh, we're not very happy, but there's a whole bunch of companies around the world that will go, whoa, let's move to that country. Let's invest, let's put our European headquarters there. And so, but it pays for itself because your benefits go down if people start getting paid the full real living wage. The health outcomes increase, all those sort of things. So you can use taxation and regulation in parallel to create a high value, high wage, growing economy, which is growing through adding value, not growing through consuming and destroying the planet.
Okay, and that brings me to another question. How do we prevent, assuming you were able, the Scottish government was able to enact these types of policies of, a good balance between regulation and taxation that gives incentives to, and all exactly what you say. How can we make the Scottish government not possible for it could become completely corrupt as it is in the United States, and to where all these things could be reversed by some lobbyist going up and giving a bunch of money to some politician and they just get rid of the regulations as they have done in the United States? How do you make the Scottish government have more integrity so that it can't be as easily corrupted as the United States government has currently become?
Well, there's a couple of ways. One is regulation, lobbying regulations. We already have quite strict ones in Scotland, and they are very aware and careful about that. If you have more than 10 employees, every single meeting you have, has to be noted, minted, and declared, and all that sort of thing. So the big lobbying companies can't necessarily meet with ministers as often as they would like to.
And what are the penalties for violation? And do you see them as effective in terms of the, because we see what's going on in Westminster right now with all the second jobs and all that stuff, and it's as if there's just no rules, or even if there are rules, they're simply not enforced.
I mean, I believe Westminster to be a totally corrupt institution, and the House of Lords is even worse because it's not even remotely democratic. Holyrood was supposed to be better. The only thing that's stopping it from being much better is the dividing line of independence, because they would work together for the betterment of Scotland after independence. But there will never be working together whilst independence is still unresolved. And it will never go away except for the yes vote. So, there's a clue. If you want a better working parliament and better relations between the parties, that's how to do it. So first of all, you regulate on lobbying, you find the best practices from around the world, and you make sure that there are no loopholes, etc. The second thing you do is you take the powers of the parliament, and you don't just leave them in the parliament. You don't have people who are all powerful and unanswerable. You take the powers of the parliament, you distribute them around the country. There are decisions that should be made locally that are being made centrally right now, partly because of budgetary constraints, because it can sometimes cost a bit more money to make them do them locally, etc. But you distribute powers, and you have meaningful powers in councils, you have meaningful powers in regions, and you have meaningful powers even from the councils, devolved, if you like, subsidiarity, that every decision that affects people should be made as close to the people affected as it can be, whilst having checks and balances to make sure that we're not disrupting everything by making decisions that mean that the national picture degrades. So basically, don't make it all powerful, devolve power within Scotland, and regulate very strongly. And also, I'd like to see, it probably won't happen straight away, but I would like to see, and I sort of asked for this in a national column about 4 years ago, a government of national unity. After independence, where everybody just says, we're all Scottish now, we're all elected members of a Scottish Parliament, we will now work together to get what's best for Scotland, and forget the what the nastiness of any campaign, etc. The issue is that unless it's a democratic one that everyone accepts the gold standard, etc., that will never happen. So there's a lot of it. Building a nation comes with accepting the result. And that's why I prefer that we exhaust, even if we're stopped from doing it, at least let's try, let's exhaust it and carry the people with us to independence.
Okay. All right. Let's get a few of the questions. I saw that Nicola Sturgeon got visited by the Flemish Prime Minister, and he apparently made a statement with regard to Scottish independence. I'm not sure what the statement was. What do you think? Additional trade contact with Flanders and Europe would mean? Do you view that as a positive sign? And how do you see it?
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, I was all ready to be really angry and blog about COP is happening in Scotland, but Scotland isn't invited. That's a stolen line from one of my members said that, and I went, I'm having that. And then the First Minister basically gate-crashed it and made it look as if it was hers, except for the things that went wrong were blamed on the UK government. It was quite clever, to be honest with you. And I, like other people, are very frustrated at the lack of progress towards independence. I think they should have done a lot more than they have done. I think they should be making the independence case more often, etc. So I'm not a fanboy, etc. But when it comes to, sorry, that was what somebody called me on Facebook today. It touched a nerve. But not really. But what she did was very clever diplomacy, getting out, talking to world leaders as if she was a world leader herself. And we're going to see some benefits of that. The flip side of it is
I share that view. I think because I think most of the countries didn't really understand what Scotland was. Aren't you Scotland, England? Where's that?
Especially Obama, who said, "Welcome to the Emerald Isle." It's like, oh God, he was rather disappointing. But well, this is not the Emerald Isle. So the other side of that is, so you've got the Scottish government pushing and doing a reasonably good job of pushing for international recognition for Scotland, and you've got European countries looking at the UK and going, we really don't like them. It'll annoy them if we say good things about independence, and maybe even some of them might feel a bit guilty about what they did last time round. Mm-hmm. But the UK is no longer a member of the EU, and if the UK is not a member and an independent Scotland would join, whether it would join EFTA or the EU, they're going to go, they're our guys, they're not, we like Scotland.
No, exactly. And EFTA could be a stepping stone to EU. There's no it would just be much simpler to join the EFTA at least first. And then I think there were countries like Portugal that were EFTA members before becoming EU members. So there's no reason it couldn't go that way. But EFTA would be much more rapid and easy. All you have to do is send a letter to them, and they're like, "Yeah, come on in," and then they'll get Scotland back in the EU.
As long as the independence is legally accepted by the international community, it would be pretty quick. I had lunch a few years ago at an economics conference with I think he might be the head of the Icelandic Reykjavik University now, but he was the economic advisor to the president of Iceland, and he basically said, "Yeah, we'd bite your hand off, come straight away. That's not a problem." But one of the things he also said was, "Look, don't see us as a stepping stone into Europe. See us as the best way to deal with Europe." Mm-hmm. And I understand. So the SNP are saying EU and not talking about EFTA, publicly anyway. And that to me could well be tactical, or it could be something they really truly believe. I honestly haven't asked them. But from my own point of view, I think joining EFTA, well, for a start, EFTA would be very quick, and the EU would take about 4 or 5 years.
Exactly.
In 2014, we could have been the successor state. That was an argument that could have been made. Brexit's happened, we're no longer a member, and therefore when we become independent, we will not be a successor state, therefore we'll have to reapply. And although we ace all of the conditions for rejoining, there is a process to go through which may take several years.
Exactly.
And so joining the EFTA to start with might be a good idea, but I wouldn't frame it as a stepping stone. I would say, well, let's do this, and if this turns out to be best, let's stay.
Yeah.
And if it turns out not to be best, then let's take the next step.
No, I agree.
How I would handle it.
I agree with that, and if there was a democratic decision, if EFTA was joined back in the EEA, and then Scotland can make a rational decision, as we say in French, tranquillement, not under the pressure of being out of the EEA. Scotland would be in the EEA as part of EFTA, and then the EU would have to say, okay, you're kind of happy in EFTA. Well, we'll offer you this, and make the EU have to make a case for joining them rather than Scotland. Oh, please take us back into single market, kind of thing. But anyway, okay.
Yeah, because if you go into negotiations with the EU having absolutely 100% promised EU membership to the population, they then go and say, "Can we join?" The EU can make you do anything because you have no options. It's not a negotiation I would like to be part of. And I do think they would negotiate in better faith than the UK government. But
absolutely. I mean, they demonstrated that throughout the Brexit process, and especially now with the Northern Ireland Protocol thing that's going on. So, okay.
Which I don't think they even understand, to be quite honest with you. I genuinely don't. I don't think that they're being really evil about this. I think they're just not that clever. I don't think they understand the ramifications of it all.
Yeah, I agree.
Which is really sad.
Okay. A few more quick questions. Not that this one has a quick answer, but what do you think will be the main differences between the 2014 and the possible 2023 referendum campaign? We alluded to this before. For the viewers that didn't see it earlier in the program, Gordon talked about how he felt that in 2014 the economic case for independence was not made strongly enough at all. So, given that, what are some of the other differences between the 2014 and a future referendum campaign?
Well, the biggest difference is we're going to win this time. And I think the other difference is that we're going to be starting from, I think we'll start from 55 when it happens. But let's say it started now, or if this is the starting point, and we're starting from 50-50. We started, I think, about, people argue about it, 27-28%. Yes, last time round. And, that's, maybe it's 35 if you take out the undecided, etc. But we've done the heavy lifting. We've done the hard work to get there. We now have something along the lines of, even when we were at 58%, and then we've dropped down to, I know one of the polls I did, somebody asked what was the last poll I did was August, and it was 47% yes when you take out the undecided. So we've dropped, from 58 in one of my polls to, did I ever get 58? I think I got 56, sorry. So, but anyway, we've dropped from 58 to 47, which might not be comparable because of different polling companies. But that drop wasn't because no went up. That's because the undecided ballooned, right?
Yeah.
And they can come back under the right circumstances. And that wasn't there before, so it's not, there isn't a yes, no. Everybody seems to think that if you're yes, then you're this dedicated, everyone's as dedicated as I am. And actually a whole load, most of the people who vote yes are just yes, and a little bit more than just yes, and a little bit more than just quite yes, I think I'll definitely do it. Most people who vote yes are not the people who wear the Believe in Scotland badges or campaign for a political party, etc. And they can swing backwards and forwards, but they didn't swing back to no, they swung to undecided. And so I think we can get them back. The really big difference is that starting at 27%, going negative would be suicidal. So the yes campaign last time was relentlessly positive. It made the mistake of not having enough detail to be relentlessly positive about. And that, I think we've learned a lot now as to what needs to be said and how it needs to be presented. But it was relentlessly positive. Now we can be negative. Brexit is a mess. Brexit's harming Scotland more than it's harming the rest of the UK because we export more, because our economy is stronger when it comes to international connections. Because we make things, we make whiskey, we export food, these sort of things. And so it's harming us more than it's harming anyone else. And it's also harming us emotionally because we were felt more European and less British. And the other thing is that the mess that's been made in Westminster gives us more negativity. So for the first time, we have permission to go really negative on them. It's not scaremongering either because everybody believes it.
And
the other thing is, Labour, even if Labour take over, cannot help the situation because they will not reverse Brexit, and therefore Labour are going to be impotent this election.
Okay. Well, that we're coming to the end of our program, but I'd just like to give you the opportunity to say anything you want, just in closing. Note of optimism for the coming years that Scotland will be independent.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things possibly to say. First of all, the difference between Believe in Scotland and Business for Scotland and a lot of other organisations is that we campaign, we reach out to the undecided, we reach out to the soft no's and the soft yeses. All of our materials are written for them, not for the yes movement. And therefore, less people read them, and therefore less people donate to us. And yet I think we're doing the heavy lifting, we're doing the important stuff. Other people may disagree. I think if there's the yes movement, which is people who talk to one another and support one another. And then there is the yes campaign and the 112 groups that campaigned with us, the National Yes Network, the political parties that are working with us, and ourselves and some other national groups are getting to grips with ideas and going out there and saying, so there's a group right now, just the other night happened, how do we protect the NHS from this new bill in England, etc. That's what I want to hear. I want to hear people getting out there and campaigning. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is that we're not going to get everything right. There are tough decisions to be made, but we have to stop knocking one another. And if somebody's trying, and you don't think they're doing a good job, give them a better idea. But if you don't have a better idea, then can it? You know,
Gotcha.
But in the final positive thing I'll say is that starting from 50-50 or 55 by in the spring next year, we got this. Unless we mess it up, we have got this. We're going to win this time round. And I think we're looking at probably September 23, but possibly May 23. It's like 18 months away. Mm-hmm. Everybody who's running a campaign should be panicking. If it's 18 months away, we're not ready. We've got to start campaigning now. That's just why we've tried to hit the ground running, which is why we tried to fire up the S groups, why we tried to fire up the SNP with this paper. We are there to work with anyone that wants to reach out to the undecided, that wants to put positive messages out there. And if you've got great ideas, come and talk to us. We'll work with you.
Okay. All right. I'll just close. I'm sure that people will be a lot more motivated when there is an actual date set and there's something that can be engaged in. Anyway, we'll leave that to the side. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Gordon, for being with us this evening. And I look back to having you at another occasion. And thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.